92nd Street Y online media is made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. This program features a reading by Harold Pinter and was recorded November 12, 1964, before a live audience at New York's 92nd Street Y.
I'd left the things I was going to read in the wings, which wasn't very much help. Well, I'm very glad to be in New York and at the Poetry Center. Before I started writing plays in 1957, I wrote a great deal of poetry and a lot of prose, narrative prose. And after I started writing plays, I've written very little, about one short story and about half a dozen poems. This is something I feel a good deal of regret about. There seems to be an obsession with dialogue when one starts getting onto it in plays, which won't leave you and doesn't seem to give you much time to write anything else. In fact, I yearn to write something full in prose which doesn't need to be split up and can take its own course. I don't think I shall write very many poems in the future. However, I thought it might be of interest tonight to read some two stories and some poems which extend back over the last 14 years. They're not very well known. And I'd like to start with a short story I wrote last year, 1963. It's called Tea Party. My eyes are worse. My physician is an inch under 6 feet. There is a grey strip in his hair, one, no more. He has a brown stain on his left cheek. His lampshades are dark blue drums. Each has a golden rim. They are identical. There is a deep black burn in his Indian carpet. His staff is bespectacled to a woman. Through the blinds, I hear the birds of his garden. Sometimes his wife appears, in white. He is clearly skeptical on the subject of my eyes. According to him, my eyes are normal, perhaps even better than normal. He finds no evidence that my sight is growing worse. My eyes are worse. It is not that I do not see, I do see. My job goes well. My family and I remain close friends. My 2 sons are my closest friends. My wife is closer. I am close friends with all my family, including my mother and my father. Often we sit and listen to Bach. When I go to Scotland, I take them with me. My wife's brother came once and was useful on the trip. I have my hobbies, one of which is using a hammer and nails, or a screwdriver and screws, or various saws on wood, constructing things or making things useful, finding a use for an object which appears to have no value. But it is not so easy to do this when you see double, or when you are blinded by the object, or when you do not see at all, or when you are blinded by the object. My wife is happy. I use my imagination in bed. We love with the light on. I watch her closely. She watches me. In the morning, her eyes shine. I can see them shining through her spectacles. All winter the skies were bright. Rain fell at night. In the morning the skies were bright. My backhand flip was my strongest weapon. Taking position to face my wife's brother across the dear table, my bat lightly clasped, my wrist flexing, I waited to loosen my flip to his forehand, watch him shocked, dart and be beaten, flounder and sulk. My forehand was not so powerful, so swift. Predictably, he attacked my forehand. There was a ringing sound in the room, a rubber sound in the walls. Predictably, he attacked my forehand. But once far to the right on my forehand and my weight genuinely disposed, I could employ my backhand flip, unanswerable, watch him flounder, skid, and be beaten. They were close games. But it is not now so easy when you see the ping-pong ball double, or do not see it at all, or when hurling towards you at speed, the ball blinds you. I am pleased with my secretary. She knows the business well and loves it. She is trustworthy. She makes calls to Newcastle and Birmingham on my behalf and is never fobbed off. She is respected on the telephone. Her voice is persuasive. My partner and I agree that she is of inestimable value to us. My partner and my wife often discuss her when the three of us meet for coffee or drinks. Neither of them, when discussing Wendy, can speak highly enough of her. On bright days, of which there are many, I pull the blinds in my office in order to dictate. Often I touch her swelling body. She reads back, flips the page. She makes a telephone call to Birmingham. Even were I, while she speaks, holding the receiver lightly, her other hand poised for notes, to touch her swelling body, her call would still be followed to its conclusion. It is she who bandages my eyes while I touch her swelling body. I do not remember being like my sons in any way when I was a boy. Their reserve is remarkable. They seem stirred by no passion. They sit silent. An odd mutter passes between them. I can't hear you. What are you saying? Speak up, I say. My wife says the same. I can't hear you. What are you saying? Speak up. They are of an age. They work well at school, it appears, but at ping-pong, both are duds. As a boy, I was wide awake, of passionate interests, voluble, responsive, and my eyesight was excellent. They resemble me in no way. Their eyes are glazed and evasive behind their spectacles. My brother-in-law was best man at our wedding. None of my friends were at that time in the country. My closest friend, who was the natural choice, was called away suddenly on business. To his great regret, he was therefore forced to opt out. He had prepared a superb speech in honor of the groom to be delivered at the reception. My brother-in-law could not, of course, himself deliver it, since it referred to the long-standing friendship which existed between Atkins and myself, and my brother-in-law knew little of me. He was therefore confronted with a difficult problem. He solved it by making his sister his central point of reference. I still have the present he gave me, a carved pencil sharpener from Bali. The day I first interviewed Wendy, she wore a tight tweed skirt. Her left thigh never ceased to caress her right, and vice versa. All this took place under her skirt. She seemed to me the perfect secretary. She listened to my counsel, wide-eyed and attentive, her hands calmly clasped, trim, bulgy, plump, rosy, swelling. She was clearly the possessor of an active and inquiring intelligence. 3 times she cleaned her spectacles with a silken kerchief. After the wedding, my brother-in-law asked my dear wife to remove her glasses. He peered deep into her eyes. "You have married a good man," he said. "He will make you happy." As he was doing nothing at the time, I invited him to join me in the business. Before long, he became my partner. So keen was his industry, so sharp his business acumen. Wendy's common sense, her clarity, her discretion are of inestimable value to our firm. With my eye at the keyhole, I hear goosing, the squeak of them. The slit is black, only the sliding gustle on my drum, the hiss and flap of their bliss. The room sits on my head, my skull creased on the brass and loathsome handle I dare not twist, for fear of seeing black screech and scrape of my secretary writhing blind in my partner's paunch and jungle. My wife reached down to me. "Do you love me?" she asked. "I do love you," I spat into her eyeball. "I shall prove it yet. I shall prove it yet. What proof yet? What proof remaining? What proof not yet given?" All proof. For my part, I decided on a more cunning, more elusive stratagem. "Do you love me?" was my counter. The ping-pong table streaked with slime. My hands pant to gain the ball. My sons watch. They cheer me on. They are loud in their loyalty. I am moved. I fall back on strokes, on gambits long since gone. Flip, cut, chop, stip, bluff to my uttermost. I play the ball by nose. The twins hail my efforts gustily, but my brother-in-law is no chump. He slams again, deep to my forehand. I skid, flounder, stare sightless into the crack of his bat. Where are my hammers, my screws, my saws? "How are you?" asked my partner. "Bandage on straight? Knots tight?" The door slammed. Where was I? In the office or at home? Had someone come in as my partner went out? Had he gone out? Was it silence I heard, this scuffle, creak, squeal, scrape, gurgle, and muff? Tea was being poured. Heavy thighs. Wendy's? My wife's? Both? Apart? Together? Trembled in stilettos. I sipped the liquid. It was welcome. My physician greeted me warmly. "In a minute, old chap, we'll take off those bandages. Have a rock cake." I declined. "The birds are at the bird bath," called his white wife. They all rushed to look. My sons sent something flying. Someone? Surely not. I had never heard my sons in such good form. They chattered, chuckled, discussed their work eagerly with their uncle. My parents were silent. The room seemed very small, smaller than I had remembered it. I knew where everything was, every particular, but its smell had altered. Perhaps because the room was overcrowded. My wife broke gasping out of a fit of laughter, as she was wont to do in the early days of our marriage. Why was she laughing? Had someone told her a joke? Who? Her sons? Unlikely. My sons were discussing their work with my physician and his wife. "Be with you in a minute, old chap," my physician called to me. Meanwhile, my partner had the two women half stripped on a convenient rostrum. Whose body swelled most? I had forgotten. I picked up a ping-pong ball. It was hard. I wondered how far he had stripped the women. The top halves or the bottom halves? Or perhaps he was now raising his spectacles to view my wife's swelling buttocks, the swelling breasts of my secretary. How could I verify this? By movement, by touch. But that was out of the question. And could such a sight possibly take place under the eyes of my own children? Would they continue to chat and chuckle as they still did? with my physician? Hardly. However, it was good to have the bandage on straight and the knots tight. I'd now like to read you a batch of poems. I wrote many hundreds of poems before 1957, and I've lost most of them, and most of which, those which remain, make no sense to me at all. And I remember very well, I started writing poetry at the age of, very early in my life. And, of course, the great influence then, the great feature of the world of poetry, as far as I was concerned, was Dylan Thomas. And in the first poem I'm going to read you, which was written in 1950, I think you might be able to discern that. In fact, I'm sure you will. I don't know precisely what interest these poems have, but I thought you might as well hear them. You've got no alternative, of course. Now, this one is called New Year in the Midlands, and it's written in 1950. Now here again she blows, landlady of lumping fellows between the boards, singing O Celestial Light, while like a T-square on the flood swings her wooden leg. This is the shine, the powder and blood, and here am I, straddled always, exile in one Whitbread ale town or such. Where we went to the yellow pub, cramped in an alley bin, a shoot from the market, and found the thin look of a queer, whose pale, deliberate eyes, raincoat, Victorian, sap the answer in the palm. All the crush, camp, burble, and beer of this New Year's night, the psalm derided. The black little crab women with the long eyes lisp and claw in a can of chock-full stuff. I am rucked in the heat of treading. The well-rolled sailor boys, soon rocked to sleep, whose ferret fig so calms the coin of a day's fever. Now in this quaver of a roisty bar, the wonsome lady I blust and stir, who pouts the bristle of a sprouting fag. Sprinkled and diced in these Midland lights are Frida, the wimping glassy board, and your spluttered guide, blessed with convivial bitterweed. Watch how luminous hands unpin the town's genitals. Young men and old with the beetle glance, the crowing brass whores, the clamping red-shirted boy, rageful, thudding his cage. The next one is written in 1951, and it's called A Glass at Midnight. Time of the mongrel at my foot, scraping for a coin that's born in the carpet in a grave of hair. Miles of the poles in the room's corners, the Eskimo stars in an octagon, worlds within this box. I hold the cipher of the voided world, 4 fingers holding the sea in a glass, incumbent an arm on the ashtray table. Time in the tug-hoot night stops a religion that grows on the window. I let the glass drop. A bridge falls. Flatten the midnight on the fingered tightrope. All the dumb days draw on. This is called You in the Night, written in 1951. You in the night shall hear the thunder and the walking air. You on that shore shall bear where mastering weathers are. All that honoured hope shall fail upon the slate and break the winter down that clamours at your feet. Though the enamelling altars burn and the deliberate sun make the eagle bark, you'll tread the tightrope. The drama in April 1952. So March has become a museum, and the April curtains move. I travel the vacant gallery to the last seat. In the spring decor, the actors pitch tents. In a beak of light begin their play. Their cries in the powdered dark assemble in mourning over ambassadors from the wings, and objects and props in the rain are the ash of the house and the grave unnumbered stones in the green. I move to the interval, done with this repertory. The Anaesthetist's Pin, 1952. The anaesthetist's pin binds up the ball of pain. The amputator's saw breaks the condition down. In the division of blood that stems the fractured bow, the wrist-attacking hand snipes out the stair below. At that incision sound, the lout is at the throat, and the dislocated word becomes articulate. I haven't the faintest idea what that's all about. Here's one called Jig, 1952. Seeing my portholed women fall on the murdered deck, I rage in my iron cabin. Faster, my starboard women, spun by the metal breeze, dance to a cutthroat temper. Seeing my men in armour brand the galley bark, I skip to dry dock. Women and men together, all in a sea-quick temper, tick the cabin clock. The next one is called Episode, and it's rather longer. It's written in 1953. It's not all that long. And when I sent this to a friend of mine, he wrote back and said, "You must be terribly unhappy. I know you've had a very unhappy love affair recently." I'm referring back to 1953. I haven't had one since. And he said, "I'm very sorry." And I pointed out to him, I remember, that this poem had nothing to do with what happened anywhere, but something that was, apart from what actually takes place. So this is Episode. Why do you follow? I tread their shadow, stranger and woman, arranging the season in her curious dream. And best announced from my alphabet home, consume their echo, cancel the sun. Why do you leave me? Of three there are figures, whose third is unechoed, where two are alone. And I, her follower, fall back to forest, cancel the sun. that she carries a bowl and selects the red stones, that her third is unechoed and close-bred, a stranger, that the thunder has broken around the round tower, I allow, allowing, not following, by the animal fire. Why do you stay with me? The crooks of my fingers distribute the ash. She widowed, her third is her lover. She widowed, unsighted, her third is her stranger. Come, our two walking, and shadows beginning, sauntering altered, and the autumn bereaving. That her third was unechoed I could hardly allow. By his bearing I knew him, and our silence making, we turned through the pillars of dust that enticed. So we crouched to begin. I counted the thunder that leaned at my temples, and crouched to begin. On his nail was her eyelash that lined the calm. He, that you did barter and consort with her, that you did ash the fire at her departure, that you did enter where I was unechoed, that you did venture where I was a stranger, that you did cajole when the pendulum hung, that you interposed in her curious dream, that you did instruct from your alphabet home, that you did confusion her eyelid to stone, that you so did render the echo unheard, that you might divide when the echo was gone, that you did condition her widowhood on, that you were the stranger that strangered the calm, that you did engender the thunder to storm, that yours was the practice you cancelled the sun. I tell that you sundered from forest consumed where I watched. Where though I stayed, where though I left, I cannot decipher which scarecrow she lured or which pleasure took. I, the plunder left to us, is a similar eyelash. Why did you leave me? Gaining through the pillars and the thunder at my temples, and her eyes that had altered, and the silence she was made of, and the dumb word ending. Why did you follow? Her third is unechoed, and I am her stranger. Now a poem called Afternoon, written in 1953. Summer twisted from their grasp after the first fever. Daily from the stews they brought the men, and placed a wooden peg into the wound they had made, and left the surgery of skin to barbers and students. Some burrowed for their loss in the ironmonger's bin, impatient to reclaim before the journey start their articles of faith. Some nosed about in the dirt, deaf to the smell of heat and the men at the rubber pit, who scattered the parts of a goat for their excitement and doubt. One blind man they gave a demented dog to sniff, a bitch that had eaten the loot. The dog, bare to his thought, became his mastiff at night, his guardian, the thief of his blood. And now the era of alarm, in 1955. A woman speaks. A pulse in the dark I could not arrest. The era of alarm I could not dismiss. A witness to that bargain I could not summon. If his substance tautens, I am the loss of his blood. If my thighs approve him, I am the sum of his dread. If my eyes cajole him, that is the bargain made. If my mouth allays him, I am his proper bride. If my hands forestall him, he is deaf to my care. If I own to enjoy him, the bargain's bare. The fault of alarm he does not share. I die the dear ritual, and he is my beer. And the last of these poems, a poem I wrote last year, 1963, called The Table. I dine the longest all this time. My feet, I hear, fall on the fat, on cheese, on eggs, on weekend bones. The sound of light has left my nose. Tattooed with all I could not see, I whisper in my deafest ear, my name erased was sometime here, or total bluff preserved its care. To this enchained, with this in love, I move on fours without a word, and stuffed with tributes, hog the scraps, breathless, under this enormous table. I'd now like to read a short piece of prose which is called the Black and White. Some of you may know of a sketch I wrote called The Black and White, which was about two old ladies at an all-night cafe. Well, this piece of prose was, in fact, its originator. In other words, it came before the sketch. And, of course, it's a monologue. The Black and White. It was written in 1955. I always catch the all-night bus 6 days out of the week. I walk to Marble Arch and get the 294. That takes me to Fleet Street. I never speak to the men on the all-night buses. Then I go into the Black and White at Fleet Street, and sometimes my friend comes. I have a cup of tea. She is taller than me, but thinner. Sometimes she comes and we sit at the top table. I always keep her place, but you can't always keep it. I never speak to them when they take it. Some remarks I never listen to. A man slips me the morning paper sometimes, the first one. He told me what he was once. I never go down to the place near the embankment. I did go down there once. You can see what goes on from the window by the top table if you look. Mostly it's vans. They're always rushing. Mostly they're the same van drivers. Sometimes they're different. My brother was the same. He used to be in on it. But I can do better without the night when it's dark. It's always light in the black and white. Sometimes it's blue. I can't see much. But I can do better without the cold when it's cold. It's always warm in the black and white. Sometimes it's drafty. I don't kip. 5 o'clock they close down to give it a scrub round. I always wear my grey skirt and my red scarf. You never see me without lipstick. Sometimes my friend comes. She always brings over 2 teas. If there's someone taking her place, she tells him. She's older than me, but thinner. If it's cold, I might have soup. You get a good bowl. They give you the slice of bread. They won't do that with tea, but they do it with soup. So I might have soup if it's cold. Now and again you can see the all-night buses going down. They all run down there. I've never been the other way, not the way some of them go. I've been down to Liverpool Street. That's where some of them end up. She's greyer than me. The lights get you down a bit. Once a man stood up and made a speech. A copper came in. They got him out. Then the copper came over to us. We soon told him off, my friend did. I never seen him again, either of them. I'm a bit old for that, my friend told him. Are you, he said. Too old for you, she said. He went. I don't mind. There's not too much noise. There's always a bit of noise. Young people in cabs come in once. She didn't like the coffee. I've never had the coffee. I had coffee up at Euston a time or two going back. I liked the vegetable soup better than the tomato. I was having a bowl then, and this man was leaning from across the table, dead asleep, but sitting up on his elbows, scratching his head. He was putting the hairs out of his head into my soup, dead asleep. I pulled my bowl away. But at 5 o'clock, they closed down to give it a scrub round. They don't let you stay. My friend never stays if she's there. You can't buy a cup of tea. I've asked, but they won't let you sit, not even with your feet up. Still, you can get about 4 hours out of it. They only shut hour and a half. You could go down to that one near the embankment, but I've only been down there once. I've always got my red scarf. I'm never without lipstick. I give them a look. They never pick me up. They took my friend away in the wagon once. They didn't keep her. She said they took a fancy to her. I've never gone in for that. You keep yourself clean. Still, she won't stand for any of it in the black and white, but they don't try much. I see them look. Mostly nobody looks. I don't know many. Some I've seen about. One woman in a big black hat and big black boots comes in. I never make out what she has. He slips her the morning paper. It's not long. You can go along, then come back. When it's light, I go. My friend won't wait. She goes. I don't mind. One got me sick. Came in a fur coat once. They give you injections, she said. It's all Whitehall. They got it all worked out, she said. They can tap your breath. They inject you in the ears. My friend came later. She was a bit nervy. I got her quiet. They take her in. When it's light, I walk up to the Aldwych. They're selling the papers. I've read it. One morning, I went a bit over Waterloo Bridge. I saw the last 296. It must have been the last. It didn't look like an all-night bus in daylight. Lastly, I'd like to read you a short story which I wrote in 1955, which is called The Examination. When we began, I allowed him intervals. He expressed no desire for these, nor any objection. And so I took it upon myself to adjudge their allotment and duration. They were not consistent, but took alteration with what I must call the progress of our talks. With the chalk I kept, I marked the proposed times upon the blackboard before the beginning of the session for him to examine and to offer any criticism if he felt so moved. But he made no objection, nor during our talks expressed any desire for a break in the proceedings. However, as I suspected they might benefit both of us, I allowed him intervals. The intervals themselves, when they occurred, at whatever juncture, at whatever crucial point, preceded by whatever deadlock, were passed naturally in silence. It was not uncommon for them to be both preceded and followed by an equal silence. But this is not to say that on such occasions their purpose was offended. Frequently, his disposition would be such that little could be achieved by insistence or by persuasion. When Cullis was disposed to silence, I invariably acquiesced and prided myself on those occasions with tactical acumen. But I did not regard these silences as intervals, for they were not, and neither, I think, did Cullis so regard them. For if Cullis fell silent, he did not cease to participate in our examination. Never at any time had I reason to doubt his active participation, through word and through silence, between interval and interval. And I recognized what I took to be his devotion as actual and unequivocal, besides, as it seemed to me, obligatory. And so the nature of our silence within the frame of our examination and the nature of our silence outside the frame of our examination were entirely opposed. Upon my announcement of an interval, Cullis would change, or act in such a manner as would suggest change. His behavior on those occasions was not consistent, nor, I am convinced, was it initiated by motives of resentment or enmity, although I suspect Cullis was aware of my watchfulness. Not that I made any pretense to be otherwise. I was obliged to remark, and if possible to verify, any ostensible change in his manner, whether it was outside the frame of our examination or not. And it is upon this point that I could be accused of error. For gradually it appeared that these intervals proceeded according to his terms, and where both allotment and duration had rested with me and had become my imposition, they now proceeded according to his dictates and became his imposition. For he journeyed from silence to silence, and I had no course but to follow. Cullis's silence, where he was entitled to silence, was compounded of numerous characteristics, the which I duly noted, but I could not always follow his courses. And where I could not follow, I was no longer his dominant. Cullis's predilection for windows was not assumed. At every interval he retired to the window and began from its vantage as from a source. On approaching initially, when the break was stated, he paid no attention to the aspect beyond, either in daytime or in nighttime. And only in his automatic course to the window and his lack of interest in the aspect beyond did he prove consistent. Neither was Cullis's predilection for windows a deviation from former times. I had myself suffered under his preoccupation upon previous occasions, when the order of his room had been maintained by particular arrangement of window and curtain, according to day and to night, and seldom to my taste or my comfort. But now he maintained no such order, and did not determine their opening or closing, for we were no longer in Cullis's room, and the window was always open, and the curtains were always open. Not that Cullis displayed any interest in this constant arrangement, in the intervals when he might note it. But as I suspect he was aware of my watchfulness, so I suspect he was aware of my arrangement. Dependent on the intensity of his silence, I could suspect and conclude. But where his silence was too deep for echo, I could neither suspect nor conclude. And so gradually, where this occurred, I began to take the only course open to me, and terminated the intervals arbitrarily, cutting short the proposed duration when I could no longer follow him, and was no longer his dominant. But this was not until later. When the door opened, when Cullis, unattended, entered and the interim ended, I turned from all light in the window to pay him due regard and welcome, whereupon, without reserve or hesitation, he moved from the door as from shelter and stood in the light from the window. So I watched the entrance become vacant which had been his shelter, and observed the man I had welcomed, he having crossed my border. Equally now, I observed the selected properties, each in their place, the blackboard, the window, the stool, and the door had closed and was absent and of no moment. Whereupon I offered Cullis the stool, the which I placed for him. So I watched the entrance become vacant which had been his shelter, and observed the man I had welcomed, he having crossed my border. Equally now, I observed the selected properties, each in their place, the blackboard, the window, the stool, and the door had closed and was absent and of no moment. Whereupon I offered Cullis the stool, the which I placed for him. He showed, at this early juncture, no disregard for my directions. If he did not so much obey, he extended his voluntary cooperation. This was sufficient for my requirements. That I detected in him a desire for a summation of our efforts spoke well for the progress of our examination. It was my aim to avoid the appearance of subjection, a common policy, I understand, in like examinations. Yet I was naturally dominant, by virtue of my owning the room, he having entered through the door I now closed. To be confronted with the especial properties of my abode, bearing the seal and arrangement of their tenant, allowed only for recognition on the part of my visitor, and through recognition to acknowledgement, and through acknowledgement to appreciation, and through appreciation to subservience. At least I trusted that such a development would take place, and initially believed it to have done so. It must be said, however, that his manner from time to time seemed to border upon indifference. Yet I was not deluded by this or offended. I viewed it as a utility he was compelled and entitled to fall back on, and equally as a tribute to my own incisiveness and patience. And if then I viewed it as a tactical measure, it caused me little concern. For it seemed at this time that the advantage was mine. Had not Cullis been obliged to attend this examination? And was not his attendance an admission of that obligation? And was not his admission an acknowledgement of my position? And my position, therefore, a position of dominance? I calculated this to be so, and no early event caused me to reassess this calculation. Indeed, so confident was I in the outcome of our talks that I decided to allow him intervals. To institute these periods seemed to me both charitable and politic, for I hoped he might benefit from a period of no demand, and so be better equipped for the periods of increased demand which would follow. And for a time I had no reason to doubt the wisdom of this arrangement. Also, the context of the room in which Cullis moved during the intervals was familiar and sympathetic to me, and not so to him. For Cullis had known it, and now knew it no longer, and took his place in it as a stranger. And when each break was stated, was compelled to pursue a particular convention and habit in his course, so as not to become hopelessly estranged within its boundaries. But gradually, it became apparent that only in his automatic course to the window and his lack of interest in the aspect beyond did he prove consistent. Prior to his arrival, I had omitted to establish one property in the room, which I knew to be familiar to him, and so liable to bring him ease. And never once did I remark, or did he remark, the absence of a flame in the grate. I concluded he did not recognize this absence. To balance this, I emphasized the presence of the stool, indeed placed it for him. But as he never once remarked this presence, I concluded his concern did not embrace it. Not that it was at any time simple to determine by what particular his concern might be engaged. However, in the intervals when I was able to observe him with possibly a finer detachment, I hoped to determine this, until his inconsistency began to cause me alarm, and his silence to confound me. I can only assume Cullis was aware on these occasions of the scrutiny of which he was the object, and was persuaded to resist it and to act against it. He did so by deepening the intensity of his silence, and by taking courses I could by no means follow, so that I remained isolated and outside his silence, and thus of negligible influence. And so I took the only course open to me and terminated the intervals arbitrarily, cutting short the proposed duration when I could no longer follow him and was no longer his dominant. For where the intervals had been my imposition, they had now become his imposition. Cullis made no objection to this adjustment, though without doubt he noted my anxiety. For I suffered anxiety with good cause, out of concern for the progress of our talks, which now seemed to me to be affected. I was no longer certain whether Cullis participated in our examination, nor certain whether he still understood that as being the object of our meeting. Equally, the nature of our silences, which formerly were distinct in their opposition, that is, a silence within the frame of our examination and a silence outside the frame of our examination, seemed to me no longer opposed, indeed were indistinguishable, and were one silence, dictated by Cullis. And so the time came when Cullis initiated intervals at his own inclination and pursued his courses at will. And I was able to remark some consistency in his behavior. For now I followed him in his courses without difficulty. And there was no especial duration for interval or examination, but one duration in which I participated. My devotion was actual and unequivocal. I extended my voluntary cooperation and made no objection to procedure, for I desired a summation of our efforts. And when Cullis remarked the absence of a flame in the grate, I was bound to acknowledge this, and when he remarked the presence of the stool, I was equally bound, and when he removed the blackboard, I offered no criticism. And when he closed the curtains, I did not object. For we were now in Cullis's room. I have some, Thank you. There are one or two questions here which have been given to me, which I'll do my best to answer. The first one is, who do you like better, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones? The Rolling Stones. This is, why do you expect to write little more poetry? The answer to that is very simple. I'm too preoccupied with writing plays, and that seems to take the place of poetry. I now have one of these, an extraordinarily, for me personally, mystical thing here. The message is, what are boots without shoes? On the question, and there are two question marks, but the thing is that I'd be very glad if they could shut that door at the back. The thing is, what are boots without shoes is the question. Under it, there's an address here, which is a London address, and I know that it is No, it isn't. Yes, I'm sorry. I thought it was the address of an old friend of mine whom I hadn't seen for many, many years. I realized he must be here. In fact, he isn't, because it's number 13 and he was number 15. But I can't answer the question. This one is, have you made study of psychopathology to obtain such believability of characters, such as the old man and the caretaker and the afternoon lover in your play The Lover? The answer is no. This is what literary influences have most affected your own work. It's very difficult to say. I think that all I know is the writers that I've admired very much and still do, and certainly in my youth when I started writing had a considerable effect on me, such as Kafka, Dostoevsky, Joyce and Beckett. But I want to make it quite clear that when mentioning those illustrious names, I do not place myself in anywhere near the same company. I believe they're major writers of this century, and I'm not. Is it fair to make us a captive audience for these readings of discards or rejections? Don't writers throw anything away? Well, the answer to that is, I'm sure it isn't fair, but I've done it. Which of your plays do you like best and why? I like none of them best. And I'm not satisfied with any of them. Generally speaking, what are you trying to achieve in your plays? No idea at all. Please interpret more freely the examination. Quite impossible. I won't go on very much longer, I think. Are character symbolism, I think, and situation symbolism effective techniques, in your opinion, in conveying dramatic atmosphere? I don't understand what the question means. Are you trying to sabotage dialogue? Is the monologue your best form of communication? I can't answer that. I don't know at all. I'm not trying to sabotage dialogue. Oh. Do you consciously try to express a certain meaning through your writings? No. Some of these questions are very long, and I don't want to keep you waiting here while I read them all. Huh. Why do you like the Rolling Stones best? I think because they amuse me more. What's this? Your other side first, please. I can't understand it. An author or playwright usually has a point of view of life. What is yours? I find that I'm always delighted when I meet someone who has a point of view of life. It makes me feel suddenly secure. And I think some people make a job out of it too, really, out of having a point of view, such as politicians and reverend gentlemen and journalists. But I don't see that most of us really have much of a point of view about anything. Rather strange. I've had about 3 or 4 questions here which I haven't replied to. It's about time I did, I suppose, since there are so many. But what do I consider to be the meaning of my play, The Dumb Waiter? Quite simply, it's impossible to answer because it just simply is not the way that one writes. I don't, at least not the way I write. I don't consider that there is a meaning outside the work and the text. The text is itself, the meaning of the play is precisely what it does and says, as far as I'm concerned, and nothing else. Will you marry me, MLT? I'm afraid not, I can't. I'm married. What is your honest opinion of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? I thought the first 2 acts were superb. I think I'll laugh at that. I thought the first 2 acts were quite splendid, and I was disappointed in the third. And I thought the whole play displayed the most remarkable stamina of our times. But I don't mean in the audience, I mean in the playwright. I'm much more interested in the playwright. The meaning of your short story, The Examination, entirely escaped me. Would you please interpret it? No. Dear Harold, how is Henry Woolf? He's absolutely fine. Thank you. I'll answer one more, I think. Why do you write? That is, what do you want your literature to say to people? Or is it simply to entertain? That is, why do you write? I have no answer. I write because I've always written since I was a young man, and a young boy, in fact. What I really wanted to, I think this relates lastly to what I've read tonight. What I wanted to do, really, was show you that, not show you, because I'm sure you know perfectly well and much better than I do. However, just to state that from my own point of view, one can write very badly and write most indifferently, and that one writes things which are of such a different texture over a long period of time. And I warned you about the poems, and you had them. They didn't take all that long, and I think that it might have been of interest, and I hope it was, for you to see a certain kind, for good or bad, move or growth in writing. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y Online Media is made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. For more audio and video programs and information about our wide array of upcoming events, please visit 92y.org. This program is copyright 2008 by the 92nd Street Y.